Okay, so ready for a deep dive. We're going to look at how society's views on blame and responsibility has shifted over time, especially when it comes to how we understand, like, diseases and disorders.
Right.
You sent over a bunch of fascinating material on epilepsy and schizophrenia.
Yeah.
So let's see what kind of surprising stuff we can uncover.
It is amazing how our understanding of illness is so tied up with these beliefs about morality and free will.
Oh, yeah?
And we're going to trace those connections through history and how they've evolved, sometimes, for the better.
Right.
Sometimes in ways that are really kind of unsettling.
So let's start with epilepsy.
Okay.
Today, it's considered a neurological disorder.
Right.
But the historical explanations are pretty wild.
Yeah.
We've got Hippocrates, phases of the moon.
Oh, yeah.
I even read about epileptic goats.
Oh, yeah. Pliny the Elder suggested that if you ate an epileptic goat, you would get epilepsy.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you imagine, the chain of events that led someone to that conclusion?
That's amazing. Yeah, so for centuries, though, the main explanation was demonic possession for epilepsy.
Right.
And this idea, it popped up in lots of different cultures.
Yeah.
The Mesopotamians, Greeks, Romans. But it was Christianity that really sort of solidified this viewpoint.
Yeah, that story in the New Testament where Jesus cures an epileptic boy.
Right.
That really had a lasting impact on people. It really cemented that link between epilepsy and demonic possession for centuries.
Yeah. And then, you've got the Malleus Maleficarum.
Oh, yeah.
In 1487.
The Witch Hunter's Handbook.
It is. Basically, two German friars.
Yeah.
They write this book explicitly tying epilepsy to witchcraft.
It's a big escalation.
It is.
And it had huge consequences. So all of a sudden, epilepsy isn't just a medical condition.
Right.
It's a sign of moral corruption. You're a danger to society.
Right.
And this leads to, the persecution and even execution of countless people with epilepsy, particularly women, who are often seen as more susceptible to the devil's influence.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, even as knowledge about the brain started to develop,
Yeah.
why did that stigma persist for so long?
Well, because I think the underlying theme was still blame.
Right.
Right. Whether the explanation was, supernatural or it was, supposedly scientific.
Right.
The message was kind of the same. People with epilepsy were somehow at fault.
Right.
It was seen as something they brought upon themselves.
So did things start to change, though, when people like Healing Jackson came along in the 19th century?
Yeah.
He's the one that introduced this idea of brain localization, right?
Yeah, he was a key figure for sure.
Yeah.
And his work really laid the groundwork for what we understand epilepsy to be today, a neurological disorder.
Right.
And we even start to see some early legal cases where people who committed acts during seizures are actually acquitted.
Wow.
So it's a sign that the justice system is beginning to recognize that these people aren't in control
Right.
during these episodes.
That's huge.
Yeah.
But even today, there's still some stigma around epilepsy, isn't there?
Oh, for sure.
It shows how these beliefs can just be so ingrained.
It does, and it brings up this really important point. Even when we understand that a condition like epilepsy is, it's a neurological event.
Right.
It's a biological thing. The question of responsibility can still be tricky, especially when it comes to actions taken during or because of a seizure.
You're talking about cases like Dorothy Bruns.
Yeah.
The woman who had a seizure while driving.
Right.
And tragically killed 2 children. It wasn't so much about blaming her for having epilepsy.
Right.
It's more about her decision to drive knowing that she could have a seizure.
Right, exactly. It raises this really difficult question. How do we balance our understanding that there's a biological basis to this condition
Right.
with this concept of personal responsibility, especially when someone's actions, have these devastating consequences?
It's a complex question. Makes you consider the nature of free will. If our choices are ultimately just biological processes,
Right.
can we truly hold anyone responsible for their actions?
Yeah. It's a profound question, and it's one that we'll continue to explore as we move into the history of schizophrenia.
Okay.
So stay with us, because the evolution of thinking around mental illness is a really fascinating story.
Right.
You won't want to miss it. So we've seen how this idea of blame has been part of our understanding of epilepsy for a long time.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears and look at schizophrenia.
Okay.
It's another condition where our perception has gone through this really dramatic transformation.
Right.
And again, like epilepsy, those early explanations were really rooted in this blame and misunderstanding.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
The whole concept of the schizophrenogenic mother
Right.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
This idea that a mother's coldness and rejection could actually cause schizophrenia in their child.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to even grasp how people believe that.
It's a perfect example of how societal biases and these kind of anxieties
Right.
can just completely distort our understanding of illness.
Right.
So you've got post-WWII America, psychoanalysis, Freudian psychoanalysis is really dominating psychiatry.
Right.
And they had these very specific and, let's be honest, often problematic ideas about the role of mothers in psychological development.
So these psychiatrists were essentially saying to mothers, if your child develops schizophrenia, it's your fault.
Exactly.
That's just appalling. So what were the consequences of this for families?
The consequences were devastating.
Yeah.
Mothers were burdened with guilt and shame.
Right.
They were often ostracized by their communities and even their own families.
Oh, wow.
This theory really created a culture of silence and fear. It prevented these open discussions about mental illness.
Right.
And it hindered access to proper treatment. So you can imagine, the added pain and isolation for families already struggling with schizophrenia.
It's mind-boggling how this theory gained so much traction,
Yeah.
especially when you consider there's literally zero scientific evidence to support it.
Yeah, that's where the power of authority comes in.
Right, right.
And cultural narratives. The psychoanalytic establishment had a lot of influence.
Right.
And their pronouncements were often accepted without question. So challenging their views was really difficult, especially for those who were already marginalized.
It seems like the discovery of antipsychotic medications in the 1950s should have been a game changer.
You'd think so.
We've got Thorazine, Haldol, blocking dopamine receptors in the brain.
Right.
This really suggested a biological link to schizophrenia. Why wasn't that enough to debunk this schizophrenogenic mother theory?
You would think it would be a slam dunk, right?
Yeah.
But the psychoanalytic community really fiercely resisted these biological explanations.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They argued that these medications were essentially just masking symptoms, just sedating patients into submission rather than addressing the supposed root cause, which they believed to be the psychological trauma inflicted by bad mothers.
Wow.
They even went so far as to coin this term dissociative organic types.
Dissociative organic types.
To dismiss families who accepted the biological basis of schizophrenia.
Okay, what did that even mean? It sounds like they were just throwing around jargon to discredit anyone who disagreed with them.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It was a way to pathologize families who were simply trying to understand and support their loved ones.
Right.
It implied that they were too uneducated or too emotionally unstable to grasp the complexities of Freudian theory.
Wow.
It was a way to hold on to their authority and maintain this blame narrative.
That's infuriating.
Yeah.
So how did this harmful and, frankly, ridiculous idea finally start to unravel?
It took a combination of things. Scientific advancements played a big role,
Yeah.
but it was the unwavering advocacy of those who were directly impacted by schizophrenia,
Right.
especially mothers.
Yeah.
That really pushed for change. They were tired of being blamed,
Yeah.
and they were determined to change the narrative.
And that's where Eleanor Owen and the formation of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, comes in, right?
Precisely. Owen, along with other mothers of people with schizophrenia, founded NAMI. And they were fueled by this, righteous anger and a deep understanding of the true nature of this illness.
Right.
They knew they weren't to blame.
Right.
And they were ready to fight for recognition and better treatment for their loved ones.
They weren't going to let these outdated and harmful theories just stand.
Absolutely not. And they found allies in the scientific community. So you've got E. Fuller Torrey,
Right.
a psychiatrist who specialized in the biological basis of schizophrenia.
Right.
He was this powerful advocate for change. He challenged the psychoanalytic establishment, and he really pushed for a more scientific approach to understanding and treating schizophrenia.
And his appearance on the Phil Donahue Show in 1988 was a pivotal moment, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
I remember reading about that. He presented all of this compelling scientific evidence,
Yeah.
including those powerful brain scan images of twins,
Yeah.
one with schizophrenia and one without.
That's right. It was a visual demonstration that the differences in their brains were just undeniable.
Right.
And Torrey spoke directly to families, reassuring them that they were not to blame.
Right.
And that really resonated with millions of viewers. It was a crucial step in bringing this issue to the forefront of public awareness.
So NMI's advocacy efforts coupled with this growing public awareness and the support of some influential figures like Senators Wellstone and Domenici,
Right.
this really helped to dismantle that harmful myth of the schizoprenogenic mother.
It did.
It's a remarkable example of how science, advocacy, and the media can work together to change these deeply ingrained misconceptions.
Absolutely. It really demonstrates the power of collective action and challenging these long-held narratives.
But even with all this progress,
Yeah.
I mean, we're still grappling with how to handle cases where someone with a mental illness, like schizophrenia, commits a crime.
Right.
You mentioned Dorothy Bruns earlier.
Yeah.
And the complexity surrounding epilepsy.
Yeah.
But it seems even more challenging with schizophrenia.
Yeah, you're right. The case of John Hinckley Jr., who attempted to assassinate President Reagan in 1981,
Right.
is a prime example. You know, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity due to his schizophrenia diagnosis.
Right.
And that verdict sparked this huge public outcry. And it really fueled this backlash against the insanity defense.
It seems like a lot of people just struggled with the idea that someone with a mental illness could be absolved of responsibility for their actions.
It's a difficult concept to grapple with.
Right.
But it brings us back to this fundamental question.
Yeah.
You know, if we acknowledge that conditions like schizophrenia have a biological basis and that our choices can be influenced by factors beyond our conscious control,
Right.
how do we approach issues of justice and accountability?
Right. It feels like we're still trying to figure out how to reconcile our understanding of the brain
Yeah.
with our legal and moral systems.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. It's a really complex issue,
Right.
and it demands this nuanced thinking. We can't just rely on these simplistic notions of blame and free will.
Right.
We have to consider, you know, the interplay of biology, environment, individual circumstances.
So where do we go from here? We've seen how our understanding of epilepsy and schizophrenia has shifted,
Right.
moving away from this blame towards a more scientific and compassionate view.
Right.
But this evolution isn't limited to just these two conditions, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
We're in the midst of this much larger transformation in how we understand human behavior
Right.
in general. You know, there's this growing recognition that biology and environment play a huge role in shaping our choices and actions.
So what other areas are ripe for, subtracting blame?
Yeah.
What other monsters, so to speak, have we learned to see in a new light?
Well, one area that immediately comes to mind is autism.
Okay.
You know, it used to be attributed to something called refrigerator mothers.
Refrigerator mothers. Wow, I haven't heard that term before. What did that even mean? Refrigerator mothers. Wow, I haven't heard that term before. What did that even mean?
It was this incredibly damaging idea that autism was caused by mothers who were cold, distant, and emotionally unavailable.
Wow.
Hence the term refrigerator.
Okay.
So it placed the blame squarely on mothers,
Right.
suggesting that their parenting style was somehow responsible for their child's autism.
It's astonishing how such a, harmful idea could gain traction.
Yeah.
It sounds like the schizoprenogenic mother theory all over again.
It really is, and unfortunately, it had a very similar impact, leaving mothers feeling guilty, ashamed, and isolated. But just like with schizophrenia, scientific evidence and the tireless advocacy of families helped to dismantle this myth. We now understand that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder with strong genetic components.
And there's this growing recognition that autism is a spectrum, right?
Absolutely.
The wide range of experiences and abilities. I've even heard some individuals with autism reject the label of disorder altogether,
Yeah.
arguing that it should be seen as a different way of thinking and experiencing the world.
Right. And that really challenges our traditional notions of what's considered normal.
Right.
And it encourages us to embrace neurodiversity and recognize the unique strengths and perspectives that individuals with autism bring to the table.
Okay, so we've talked about epilepsy, schizophrenia, and autism.
Right.
What about PTSD?
Yeah.
That's another condition that's been historically misunderstood and stigmatized.
Yeah.
Think about that infamous incident with General Patton slapping a soldier during World War II. Back then, what we now recognize as PTSD was seen as cowardice or a lack of mental fortitude.
Yeah. And for decades, veterans really struggled to get proper recognition and treatment for PTSD.
Right.
They were often dismissed as malingers or attention seekers.
Right.
It's just a tragic example of how this lack of understanding can lead to further harm. But thankfully, research has revealed the biological underpinnings of PTSD,
Yeah.
showing how trauma can actually alter the brain's structure and function.
So instead of blaming individuals for their struggles,
Right.
we're starting to understand that PTSD is a real debilitating condition that results from, experiencing or witnessing these traumatic events.
Exactly. And this shift in understanding has led to, significant improvements in how we treat PTSD and support those who live with it. Therapies like cognitive processing therapy
Right.
and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR,
Right.
have shown really remarkable results in helping individuals process their trauma and reclaim their lives.
It's amazing to see how far we've come in understanding all these conditions. But where are we still falling short?
Yeah.
What are the next frontiers in, subtracting blame?
Well, one area that immediately comes to mind is addiction.
Okay.
We're still really struggling as a society to move beyond the view of addiction as this moral failing or a weakness of will. But science is painting a much more complex picture,
Right.
revealing the interplay of, genetics, environment, and brain chemistry that all contribute to addiction.
So it's not simply a matter of just choosing to stop using drugs or alcohol.
Right.
It's about recognizing these underlying biological and social factors that can drive these addictive behaviors.
Exactly. And this shift in thinking has huge implications for how we approach treatment and prevention. It means moving away from punitive measures.
Right.
And focusing more on harm reduction, providing support, and addressing the root causes of addiction.
So it's about treating addiction as a health issue, not a criminal one.
Exactly. And we see this shift happening in other areas as well, with learning disabilities like dyslexia,
Right.
with understanding gender identity and expression, even with how we view, everyday behaviors and choices. The more we learn about the brain and the factors that shape our experiences, the more we realize that these simplistic notions of blame and personal responsibility often fall short.
So what does this all mean for, the listener? Why should we care about subtracting blame?
Because it really has the power to create a more just and compassionate world. When we understand the complexities of human behavior, we can move beyond judgment.
Right.
And create systems that actually support individuals rather than punish them. We can foster empathy and understanding,
Right.
recognizing that, everyone faces challenges and everyone makes mistakes.
It's about recognizing that shared humanity in all of us,
It is.
regardless of, our struggles or our past actions.
It's about embracing this idea that we're all products of our biology, our environment, and our experiences. No one is immune to the challenges that life throws our way.
That's a powerful message. So for you, the listener, the challenge is this. What other areas of human behavior are we still clinging to these outdated notions of blame?
Right.
Where can we apply this more nuanced, compassionate lens?
Because just as we've learned to see epilepsy, schizophrenia, and all these other conditions differently,
Right.
there's always the potential for us to change how we think about the world and the people in it.
Right.
And that change, that journey towards understanding and compassion really starts with